You can start seeing that right here. That's painted, that's pine painted to look like oak. And then you got, this is pine painted to look like oak. This really fits in with it, doesn't it?
Houses are layered. I just think it's remarkable that the original graining has survived in this house.
I've got something to show you upstairs that I failed to point out, and it's pretty interesting too.
Dennis, can you tell me a little bit about the faux graining, what that was all about, who did it, why did they do it?
I know why.
They wanted the material to look like a more expensive molding and an interior feature. And
They wanted it to look like mahogany or
yeah,
walnut.
Yeah, and this one was grained to look more like oak. But upstairs, there's an example that was grained to look like actual marble. A lot of times I've been told they used turkey feathers to dip into the pots of paint, and it was a very specialized skill. A lot of times you had an itinerant traveling artist that would go around and offer their services, just like the plaster craftsmen that worked at Glen Mary. They weren't local, they sometimes came from very far distances, but it was something that the homeowners were willing to pay, and it was a bargain price compared to buying the actual, especially mahogany wood. See how beautiful the floors are in this house, just really magnificently finished. And this was top grade material because it doesn't have as many knots. It's like the fine selection. They got one good board out of every tree, but this is more like the floors at Glen Mary. Mine has a lot more knots, so it was not built by people with quite the wealth that this house, or certainly Maryland's.
When I bought the house, there were 18 balusters missing on this stairwell. And when I was stripping stuff, but this is original paint, and it's purple. So somebody painted some stuff in the house purple. Come on up. Let's see.
I find this one interesting too, Chad. The handrail here is not mahogany, but it looks like it would have been originally painted to mimic it. But you think this is pine? It looks like
It's
pine.
pine. It's pine.
So
This
rather
is
than,
definitely-
Maryland's is actual mahogany, but here they use more local materials and just painted it to look like more expensive species of wood. But you notice how graceful the stair treads are here. They're very easy to climb.
And how wide it is. Dennis, come let me show you this. This is painted to look like mahogany.
Yeah,
It's easier to see on this side.
right.
That's grain painted. But this is what I failed to show you though, I guess. Set this out of the way a little bit. That's painted.
Oh, yeah.
Not, look, it's painted to look like bird's eye maple. But look, it's also got molded painted in.
Oh, it sure does.
But it's amazing to me that no housewife didn't come along and paint this all.
Typically, most people in the 20th century would just put white paint on everything.
Yeah.
And that's the miracle of this house, Chad, is that so much of this original faux graining. Look at how dramatic, and what they're trying to do here is mimic that's the flame grain mahogany, which of course at Glen Mary is the real thing. It's a veneer, but here they wanted it to look like a much more exotic and expensive wood, and that was just all done painstakingly by hand.
We saw that, you know, Bill Bowling out in Devereaux.
Yeah.
He's got an 1800, and he had some of this graining, and he had no clue. Dennis was telling him about it, how it was original to the.
Yeah.
Now, what about this trim here, Dennis? Look at that.
I find that to be very interesting, that they have of solid squares.
That's got the hard pine coming through.
Yeah. But you don't see the same.
This was painted with feathers, because you can see how they.
And look at the
swing.
square nails,
Yeah, oh yeah.
which indicates pre-1880, original to the house, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is an 1850s structure.
Yeah, that's a minor miracle that that thing has survived like
Yeah.
that. You just don't see that. And like you said, everybody painted white.
Theory that this would have been the main living floor
I think this
with exterior stairs, because everything is a bit more elegantly treated and the ceilings are higher.
13 feet.
But look at the mantle in this room, Chad. This is,
Now, what about this green paint were you talking about, Dennis?
you see it on the front, and it actually matches every other door surround in the hall. And I think this may be the original green paint. And again, the fact that all of this has survived without ever being recoated is astounding. And
it's a
you
miracle.
don't find that often. But see, every door surround here in the hall is the same color. And in fact, it looks like that door is the olive treatment too, but these were done to look more like the mahogany, but this is mimicking marble.
Yeah.
They have kind of a spider web pattern, which would have looked like the graining in actual marble. Sometimes the itinerants who painted these carried little samples of the actual wood or marble that they were attempting to replicate, and they copied that. But this is an extraordinary example of mid-19th century folk painting, but has to be extraordinarily rare. Aren't these floors beautiful, Chad? Almost no knots. And these beautiful boards.
Now, why would they not want to have knots in them?
It looked more refined.
Yeah.
And sometimes the owners hand-picked every board. The paint is remarkably clean, considering that they used wood-burning fireplaces for as many years as would have been prevalent here.
And it's interesting how these couple of these fireplaces were painted, but the others weren't. Unless these are replaced later on.
No, I think they're original mantles. They've just been painted instead.
Yeah.
And that looks like modern
I
paint.
think that's the only one that's been painted.
So you think this paint is original, Dennis?
I believe all of this olive green paint is original to the house.
Now,
The fact that it hasn't been painted is miraculous.
Look how this was used. This, I put this here, but this was here before. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
a spool, a thread spool.
Do you know anything about that, Dennis?
Well, I'm sure it was just a replacement knob, but that's a sewing thread spool.
Yeah.
You know, they just nailed it in because they're hollow in the middle, so they just nailed it in and created a functional knob for the closet door. This whole treatment of the door surround on the second floor is far more refined and elegant than the one on the ground floor.
Yeah.
And Don had mentioned to me before that he believed that there was a possibility that this was a raised cottage and that there would have been a flight of steps going up this high from the ground level to this floor, which would have been the primary entertaining floor,
Yeah.
with likely bedrooms on the ground floor because they were cooler in the summer.
Yeah.
Second story rooms are always hotter because the heat rises
And that's why they put the extra 5 feet in the
in
ceiling.
the ceiling.
Yeah.
But I think that's very likely. But that's beautiful paneling treatment. in the door surround. But again, the fact that this paint is likely the original paint on all of these doors and woodwork is, again, a miracle that it has survived, and it's in great shape.
Yeah.
They used really good paint and pigments in those days. It would be interesting to know, what kind of chemicals they mixed in order to achieve this hardness that would have held up this many decades. It's almost 175 years.
And I think it's interesting too how it's a flat finish.
Mm-hmm.
Although maybe that's just from time, but I think they would have,
Oh, yeah.
they wouldn't have had the glossy.
No. Now, the high gloss paints were not developed until much later. But it's extraordinary.
I love the look of that unfinished railing.
I had already put stripper on it, so I wiped it off and,
What do you know about the history of the house?
not much. A brother and sister were born in the house in like the years right after the Civil War, or maybe 1870s or something. And they both lived their whole lives here, and they died in their 90s. And he died in this room, and she died in Baldwin County Hospital.
And what was their last name?
Boyer,
Okay.
yeah.
So they weren't the ones that built it, though.
That book, that I think I left a copy of that red book that had the history of Linton. I left it with you
Yeah, I've
a
got
couple of
it.
weeks ago. That has some information about the far back history. I don't recall now. Fascinating.
The first house Jane and I bought was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I went up there booking rock and roll bands. And this glass piece right here